All right, looks like we are 1 minute after, so let's go ahead and get started. My name is Nicole Lyons. I'm from the Jorgensen Learning Center, and I am here today with two of my colleagues, Colleen Sullivan and Julie Wise, and we are so excited to be here with all of you today. We appreciate you taking the time to join us. We know time is a valuable resource for all of you, and it is an honor for us, for you to have taken the time to join us today. So we really appreciate it. We are, as I mentioned, part of the Jorgensen Learning Center, and our team is a team of leadership communications coaches, and we are committed to supporting leaders to enhance the quality of their everyday leadership conversations so that they can enhance their relationships and their results. We are using the Zoom platform today. For those of you who aren't familiar, there should be some controls at the bottom of your screen, and that is how you're going to be able to interact with us today. There are several ways that you can do that, and we encourage you to do that throughout the session. You can use the Q&A feature, you can use the chat feature, and both of those are really great ways that you can connect with us as the facilitators, and you can connect with each other in the comments. So we really encourage you, as you use the chat functionality, you can choose whether you chat to the panelists, or you can choose to chat with panelists and attendees. So make sure you're selecting the appropriate one as you're engaging with us today. And we will answer questions and engage with the chat throughout the session. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to turn it over to Colleen.
Absolutely. And once again, we're so grateful for you taking time out of your busy day to spend some time and have a conversation with us today. And I'm sure, I know in our team meetings with my colleagues here, a lot of people are talking about returning to, whether it's the kids going back to school. Julie and myself just took a few our kids, drove them back to college. What does that look like? What is their world going to look like in this kind of pandemic age, right? Where also, I know Nicole was taking her son back to school. Also, in that same conversation, many of us are talking about that pivot, right? We're at a place where we're going back to the workplace in some capacity. Some people might be a couple days a week. It might be a hybrid model. It might be all the way back to work. So a lot of these different types of conversations are taking place, I would guess, probably with all of us, whether we're in the grocery store, whether we're with our friends, or whether we're at a family barbecue. Well, today we're going to talk specifically about work. And one of the things that we know is the quality of the professional relationship enhances our ability to produce results, right? Well, what does that mean, and what does that look like? Well, today, specifically, we're going to focus on 4 different ways that you can work specifically to enhance and reinvigorate and re-engage those conversations with those you either work with or those you lead. Our hope is at the end of this, you will walk away with at least 1 or 2 things that you can immediately apply, whether you're in a virtual environment or whether you're back in the workplace, so you can enhance those quality professional relationships, so you can create a space that is safe, so you can have trust and really, really have the candid conversations to produce the results you're looking to achieve. Big set of sentences, focus in our conversation for today. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and close the learning loop. I'm going to tap into my girlfriend, Julie, and say, hey, Julie, what did you hear me say that we're going to be focusing on our short 45-minute webinar today?
I heard that we're going to talk about 4 specific things that can enhance your personal relationship, so that when you have a better relationship, you can establish that trust and that safe space to say what you need to say. And as we return back to work, oftentimes it's awkward because we were close, but now we haven't seen each other in over 2 years. And so how do you re-engage in that relationship?
Yeah, absolutely. Or you're like, I'm doing so good. I love working at home because I don't have to see Nicole. And I really didn't like her very much. But now I'm going back and I got to think, how am I going to re-engage and work with somebody that perhaps in the past I really wasn't too close with? So thank you so much, Julie. Absolutely. And the second piece that I'd just like to add on to that is we're going to talk about 4 things. In addition, please look at how my friends, how my colleagues here are facilitating and how we're facilitating the conversation. So please be thinking about 2 things. How are we facilitating our conversation in the webinar? And the second piece is, what's the content we're sharing? Absolutely. So Nicole, did you hear anything different or anything more that you'd like to add?
I think I heard very much what Julie heard. This is really about how do we really intentionally create some practices where we can reconnect with each other, where we can maybe work through some of the places where we feel like we might have challenges reconnecting with people. A lot has changed in the last couple of years, and I would say even going back several years, that have caused some disconnect between people in the workplace, between people and their organizations. There's been a lot of shifts and a lot of changes, and on top of shifts and on top of changes. So this has been an environment where we're continuously evolving, changing, shifting, living in uncertain times. And I think in those times, these four things that we're going to talk about today are so essential. So I'm looking forward to digging into those.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, we hear those words and in leadership that you hear in your trainings, you hear about resilience, adaptability, flexibility. I really feel like, boy, are we living it now, because things continue to adapt and change.
Yeah.
And even in my world, I talk to a lot of my friends, a lot of the clients that we work with, and they're like, okay, well, we're coming back to the office full time. Wait a minute. No, not anymore. Now we're going to do this. So I think the other piece is to remember that flexibility and adaptability. And what does that really look like when I truly am in a space of being flexible, right? It's not locking on to one way. It's being open to multiple ways and knowing that the information that my supervisor, that my HR department, that my organization receives is constantly changing. So just be knowing that, many times that whatever that new work environment looks like, it is probably going to be fluid, shall we say. Excellent. Well, I'd like to just jump into our first point. And before we go there, I just want to share another quick story. All three of us are working with executives across the country. And so in a conversation that I had just the other day, I was asking about how are they staying in touch with their team? And they mentioned that they do have a few Zoom conversations. However, as you go down, let's say the other levels of leaders, my question was, well, how are they staying in touch? And a few of them weren't quite sure. And when they started to dig deeper to see how is that communication taking place, they were learning that some people were no longer meeting. And what we found is we'll meet with our inner team because I like Julie and I feel comfortable with Nicole, but perhaps those other levels of leaders weren't staying in consistent conversation. And so we always talk about, think of that last conversation that you had with your team. What does that look like? What was it like? And how can we enhance it? So with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to my girlfriend, Nicole, and she's going to really talk about the importance of over communication, especially perhaps when you're in this virtual environment where we used to be able to walk down the hallway and say, hey, Julie, I thought of something. And now we don't have those opportunities necessarily. Nicole?
Yeah, thank you, Colleen. So over communicate and facilitate common understanding. It's one I really wanted to add into this idea. It's really key to over communicate, especially during times of change and times of uncertainty. And that can look a lot of different ways at different levels of leadership. From your C-suite, that might mean communicating more regularly via email. It might mean putting your face out on video in front of your people. It also might mean having additional smaller group meetings in order to connect with people within your organization. Actually, there's a really great example from a CEO, and I'm blanking on the company at the moment, but he, at the start of COVID, instituted a weekly company-wide meeting. We're talking thousands and thousands of people that he brought together, on a video call weekly and answered their questions and responded to their comments. And that level of connection has really served their organization and played into their decision to whether or not to stay virtual or to go back into the office. And he was like, I'm not going back in the office. I feel more connected now with this level of in-depth communication that we have than I did before the pandemic. So there's some really great examples of how to over communicate. And I think that makes sense to a lot of us. It seems like, oh yeah, of course, over communicate seems obvious. But I think it's a great reminder to think about the fact that when you're in a role where you are the leader, you've been in how many more meetings than your direct reports about the topic. When you're in a position, I know I spent a lot of time in positions where I was involved in strategic planning and development. And when there were big changes, involved in the communication around those changes. So I had talked about those with people for months, maybe before communications started going out to the organization. So it seemed like, yeah, we can send this email and it all makes perfect sense to me. But I've been in it for months. And as leaders, I think we forget that we have more access and we have more time to process and take in information and messages. And then we send out our email or we have our one quick meeting and expect that everyone else is just going to be where we are. And that's not the case. So if you're in a role like that, or you as a leader, there's communications and messages coming down, giving people the opportunity not only to hear that message, but to create their own common understanding and create some shared meaning around it is powerful. That's where you're going to see the shifts and the changes and the differences in the environment. So I'm going to pause there. And I know Colleen and Julie, we all have stories about where we've seen this play out really well, and maybe stories where we've seen it not play out so well. So I'm going to invite you into the conversation, and I would love to hear some stories from our attendees out there. Where was the time where you had the opportunity to over communicate and it worked out really well? Or maybe had a time where we didn't get enough communication and it didn't go well. So I'd love to hear some of those stories in the comments. And then Colleen and Julie, I'd love to hear some stories from your experiences.
Sure. So a time when the over communication worked really well, I was working with a client and everyone was all hands on deck. I mean, everyone was spending much more time. And what they did with their over communication was to give really specific feedback, acknowledging and appreciating what was happening. And it wasn't just, you're all doing a great job, I couldn't do it without you, but it was using people's names, specifically what they're doing and how that linked back to the mission, the vision, what we were really here for. And hearing that, you can't do that enough. Either you do it individually or you do it as, a group text. But that was one thing that definitely helped with the over communication. And another one, and then I'll pass it on to Colleen, was a lot of times we over communicate, we get too many emails. So people are like, oh, I'm supposed to send more emails? No way am I going to do that. And we want to be really specific as to what the type of communication is. First of all, finding out our preferred way of communicating. Just because we send emails, sometimes those that are younger than us, they don't necessarily like to get words. They like to get it in picture form, or they like it, face to face, that sort of thing. So be thinking, if your over communicating is not working, think about, what is everyone's preference? Can you figure that out? And then ensure that you're really providing some type of CPO. If you're forwarding on something where it really is clear to that group of people, this is why I'm sending it to you. This is what I want you to understand. And this is what I want you to do differently. And it's possible that it's an article and you only want them to focus on page 3. And so by giving them that right in the beginning, you can be really clear and what your intention is. Colleen?
Yeah. Well, before we move forward, you laid out some beautiful things on the table. And I know, in response to Nicole. So I'd love just, Nicole, for you to react. What did you hear Julie say are some of these additional ways to really over communicate intentionally, right? We just don't want to spam people is what I'm hearing her say. But what are your thoughts on what Julie offered?
Yeah, she laid out some beautiful things for us there. The last one she laid out there was creating clarity. So be clear about what you want people to know and understand about the message. I think is a huge takeaway from this. If you can create that context, purpose, and outcome for somebody, even if it's an email, even if you're sending out an article, that will let people know what it is that you expect of them to do with the information. And then the other thing I heard from Julie that I really loved was there are ways that you can communicate something and use the space to really recognize individuals for not only their individual contribution and what the specific ways they communicated or they contributed to whatever the initiative was, and you connect that work back to the bigger goals. And I think that's really key and essential to having people feel valued, for one, but also feel like they're contributing to something bigger than themselves, which is a key element of employee engagement.
Yeah.
So those were really wonderful points. Thank you, Julie.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to kind of give you a couple of things that I was thinking of as we were listening in the conversation. And I encourage everyone out there as well, be thinking about what are some of the ways you successfully over communicated with common understanding, and maybe give some examples of where that hasn't happened. Just wanted to really hone in on that over communicating with common understanding. And we talked about being intentional about emails. And I jokingly said spam, right? Because some people, that's what they do. You want me to over communicate? Well, they're not sitting in the office with me. So I'm just going to send out emails, send out emails, send out emails. That's one way, right? Not necessarily the only way. So my invitation to you is, when you're thinking about over communicating, remember that second piece that Nicole talked about. Am I communicating and developing a common understanding of what is the key information that I'm sharing? What do I want people to do? What are the expected actions? If I'm not sharing that extra piece, I'm just disseminating information, expecting people to develop personal practical meaning and personal practical knowledge, and either shift their behavior or do something differently. And if I'm not explicit about what I'm communicating, and the multiple times I'm communicating, what I expect people to know and be able to do, it will be lost on them. So once again, right, dissemination is the capacity for effective action. It doesn't guarantee it. So number one, and we got to move on. These are great points, and I'm so grateful for all of those examples. The first one is over communicate with common understanding. So before we move forward to number two, Nicole, I wanted to check in to see, did we have any comments, questions from our participants in our audience?
Nothing yet, Colleen. So I think Julie is doing a great job of capturing our key points there in the comments for people to react to, but no questions yet.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So Julie, number two, I'm going to hand over to you, my friend. And this one is listen to understand. So can you really help us and link that back to how does that really help us enhance and reinvigorate our professional relationships?
A lot of times we as leaders show up like we know everything, or we have the pressure to feel like we should know everything. And one of the biggest things when I work with administrators at school districts, and I work with them to set up their meeting agendas, and they're worried about, they have like 17 things that they want to cover in their meeting. And I said, do you ever ask the teachers what they would like to talk about? And what do they need from you? And how do you do that? And the administrators are like, I can do that. Like, I don't need to have the answer. And yeah. And so what happens then is all of these little tedious things that could have been sent via email that the administrator wasn't aware of drops out of the meeting. Now they can really hold a meeting around the instructional focus. They can learn new ideas and share them with each other. And so when we're talking about listen to understand, it's not showing up in judgment that I know, but it's listening to say, I'm curious. I want to know more. How does this land on you? What's happening with you in your classroom? And really doing an outward to inward versus outward, 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 outward. And I have one more sort of statistic that happens, and then I'd love both of your feedback. So I'm not quite sure how, but research suggests that we talk on average about 150 words a minute. And we think 500 words a minute, or we hear 500 words a minute, and we think 900 words a minute. So if we are constantly doing all of the talking and never pausing to really listen to what other people are saying, then we can be missing an entire conversation that's happening in the room, in everybody's head. And at the same time, we might miss what other people are saying too, because we're thinking about how we want to respond. And so it's a really big discipline to sort of say, okay, I'm going to put what I'm thinking off to the side and really focus in on what you're thinking so that I can repeat back and say, this is what I heard. Is this correct?
All right, Julie. Well, math was never my long suit in a high school or in college, but I'm pretty sure those numbers that you just said didn't add up. And I think that's a great thing, that it demonstrates that there's a gap, right? Many times when somebody's speaking, I'm assuming that everybody's getting it. And even if I show up in that meeting and I am truly focused and doing my best to pay attention, to listen, to understand, I could be missing out on some key pieces of information. And so what I'm hearing you say is, it's really critical, important that when we are sharing information, that we ensure our words are landing on the people in the way intended. Otherwise, once again, they can't behave, change, shift what it is, their instructional practice, right? Perhaps it's a performance conversation. They can't pivot unless they understand the information that's being shared. So I want to pause and pivot to my girlfriend, Nicole, here. What are you hearing? What are you thinking? And do we have any comments?
Yeah, so all three things, Colleen. So first, I wanted to throw another statistic out there. Julie, as you're sharing those statistics, I was reminded of some research and data on communication. And one of the things that happens to us as listeners when we are feeling stressed or there's an emotional reaction to something happening in the conversation, our ability to take in information is actually diminished by about half. So even as you're sharing those statistics, if there's any sort of tension, if I'm having a reaction to something, my ability to hear you or understand what's happening or what's being said is diminished by half. So if we're not taking that intentional time to listen for understanding and create that common understanding, let people react to what they're hearing, they may not have heard anything we really wanted to communicate.
Right.
Yeah,
and just think, Nicole, about all the virtual meetings we've been having. If I'm stressed out because my daughter's sick, or I've got a grandmother I need to take to an appointment, but I need to be here, to your point, I'm stressed and I'm not getting all of the information in. So I might be sitting here going, yes, that sounds good, Nicole. Yeah, let's move forward with that. Or I might have my camera off. So now I'm perhaps logged on, but am I listening to understand? If I don't listen, I'm not getting the key pieces of information I need so I can think about it, provide my best thinking, provide guidance to the group, provide my insights. Yeah. Excellent. Nicole, anything else before we kind of move on to our third point?
Yeah, we have a couple of great comments in the chat. Someone is sharing that they just came to their position a couple of months ago, the preschool for all administrator and instructional leaders at an academy, a fairly new employee, and going back to others, looking for advice, training, ways that they can do their job more effectively. Sharing that they communicate a lot with their district director and trying to get them to over communicate with her so that she can, get up to speed and do her job the best. But feels almost apologetic when she's communicating with them daily. On the flip side, I do feel like I need to over communicate a bit more with my teachers in my 5 centers. It's a challenge to me to guide them when I'm looking for guidance myself. Any thoughts or reactions to that comment?
Julie?
Yeah, I think that, what's the phrase that she used? The apologetic. You can take that out now. Like once you've done it once, everybody gets your intention and we understand. And so that in itself can be taken out, and then the message can be even shorter. And know that every time that you do it, and you can ask for feedback every once in a while. You can go to your teachers and you can say, hey, I'd like to just, really quickly, what's going well with my communication? What is something maybe that you've learned that you'd like me to do differently? And, how else can I support you? And then that will handle your fear or worry that you're over communicating and it's not being effective.
Yeah, that's excellent. What I'm hearing you say is really kind of make your thinking visible, right? Verbalize it. And this is kind of, how is my thinking? Get some feedback and that'll help guide you. And the other piece that I actually heard or perhaps inferred was setting the stage. Oh my goodness, putting a little bit of context is so critically important. So if you are sending that email to perhaps your supervisor is, hey, I am doing my absolute best to keep all of my teachers informed. And I'm writing to you just to get as much information as I possibly can to ensure that my teachers feel like They are up to date in all of these different changes that are going on, so they can continue to have these quality conversations with the parents that are coming up asking them questions as well. Because boy, once you set that stage, then they go, oh, I understand, right? It's not somebody just continuing to say, hey, I need more information, hey, I need more information. But once you put a little context behind that, as you stated, Julie, put some context behind it, and perhaps some of those emails and those conversations with your teachers really do, like Julie said, a beautiful job of asking for some feedback. So before we move forward, we've had number one, which was over communicate with a common understanding. Number two, we've really been talking about listening to understand. You've heard a couple different ways that you can do that and incorporate that into not only emails, but in your actual everyday leadership conversations. We have two more we need to address, and I'm looking at the time, want to make sure we get to those. But before we do, Nicole, is there anything else, any questions, comments before we move forward to the third?
Yeah, I think this one here sort of speaks to me. It says temporary subordination to someone else creates psychological safety. And to me, that speaks to vulnerability. When we as leaders can show up and be vulnerable, be learners, not knowers. If we can be learners, that builds psychological safety and trust. When we show up and are really transparent about that we don't have all of the answers. I'll just share an example. I worked with a leadership team where there were a lot of heavy, big communications about changes coming out pretty consistently. And they often came in as an email from higher ups. And they went into meetings with their teams. I saw it both ways. I saw it one way where someone would come in and say, okay, everybody saw that communication. Anybody have any questions? And saw, crickets and silence. And then I also had other leaders who went into that space and said, this is all the information that we have right now. I want to check in with you. How did it land on you? What are you feeling as a result? How do you feel like this affects you? And I don't have any more information than what's here, but I want to provide the space for you to react to what's occurring, for you to share your concerns. If you have questions, I want to hear them because I can take those back and, maybe we can get some answers sooner rather than later for you. So just showing some vulnerability, not showing up like you're the all-knowing leader can really go a long way, as the comment said, in building that psychological safety and trust.
Yeah, beautifully stated. And I love when you say, it's showing up and not necessarily knowing all the answers, and the way that, say that statement and how they phrased it one more time, Nicole.
Temporary subordination to someone else creates psychological safety.
Love it, because you don't need to fix, you don't need to have all the answers. And that's not a sign of weakness. And that's not a sign of that you're not smart enough. That is an absolute sign of being curious. And curiosity is so critical, right? And oh my goodness. And that falls right into, in your story, Nicole, was beautifully set up. Number three. So I'm going to lay number three out on the table for our friends here, which is promote team learning. And what I heard Nicole say was, as a leader, how am I providing space for people to reflect, right? Self-reflection generates change. And here at JLC, we use change and learning almost synonymously, right? Because when I'm pausing to think about not only how I'm showing up, but also to create that space for the team to think about, how are they communicating together? I mean, Julie had a great example earlier on point 2 that is also creating space for team learning, creating space to create trust, and space for people to say something, right? So they feel connected and relevant. When we don't have that sense of connectivity and relevance, I disengage. I'm no longer focused on achieving results. I'm no longer focused on how am I co-creating and collaborating with the rest of my team. I'm not contributing my thinking. I'm just kind of leaning back and checking the box. And boy, it creates a whole different type of environment and results. So I'm going to pause, Julie. You've heard Nicole set us up beautifully for promoting team learning. I've added a couple other thoughts. What are you hearing us say, and what's really surfacing for you at this point in the conversation?
So I'm hearing that whenever we communicate, it's not a one-way street. It is a whole entire team. If there's more than one person in that room, who is doing the talking? If only you were doing the talking, then it's not a team learning situation. And I've seen a lot of times leaders are afraid to have those free question and answer, share what's going on, because they know that it could be very heated, and people could get upset and people could get angry, and they don't know how to deal with that, so they avoid it. And they think after the meeting, oh, that was a really good meeting. Meanwhile, after the meeting, there's a meeting happening about the meeting. And so this idea of team learning is that we learn from each other, that we have a commitment to each other to stay in the conversation, even if I'm angry, even if I'm upset, even if I'm disagree, I'm willing as a team to continue to hear everyone out. And I've seen, and for leaders, if you can just get a few phrases, and I've seen this work so well. There was a hospital that was having staffing issues, and they wanted to hire more people, but they couldn't hire more people. And then there was this patient safety concern and all this sort of stuff. And so the leader did one of these, like Nicole said, after the email came out, she pulled them all together and said, okay, what are your thoughts? And she had certain phrases that she used over and over again, and I'll see if I can pull them up, but it was something like acknowledging what they were saying. So you're exactly right. This is difficult, and I'm concerned too. Not that she was necessarily agreeing, but she was at least acknowledging what they were saying and that validating those ideas. And they felt heard. And in most cases, after they had that meeting, even though it was a really sweaty, 30 minutes for the leader, things settled down then, because they said their piece. And then it was like, okay, you've heard me, and now I know these are the conditions of the game. I will go back and do the best I can. So I'll pause there and pass it back to you, Colleen.
Sure. Well, I guess what I'm hearing you say is, when there is tension within a team and they're truly not creating dangerously safe space, they're not in a space of trust, what you recognize and what you identify is an example of what a leader can do, right? I always say, like the TSA, when you see something, say something. If you recognize there's some awkwardness in your team and people aren't getting along, you need to, as the leader, say something. And you gave a great example of a one-on-one where you can give somebody the space to surface something so they can clear it. And then with the intention of, when they go back to the group, now they've said their piece, they can let go of that and move forward. So once again, before we move forward, this team learning is so critically important, because if we want to focus on the team winning, not individual efforts, but a truly collaborative team, that is so critically important that we highlight that and we focus on those behaviors and skills that will keep us focused on team. So I want to hand it back. Nicole, what are you thinking, and what other thoughts do you want to add before we move forward to our fourth and final skill?
Yeah, it's just the idea of a team being able to connect with each other, to engage in respectful conversation with each other, where they have the ability to disagree and move forward together, is so critical and essential to productivity and engagement and long-term satisfaction and happiness. I mean, what you're talking about, Julie, is really feeling heard and understood is one of the key elements of employee engagement, and a key indicator of whether or not you are going to achieve your ultimate desired results. So I think that those elements and pieces, like Colleen was saying, are critical to your team performance and to the individual happiness and satisfaction of those that you're working with. And I think that it begins in those team conversations. Your ability to take in someone's reaction and comment and acknowledge and respond respectfully is so key. Like, you're not going to create an environment where you can have candid conversations when something critical or stressful happens, if you're not doing that in your everyday conversation. So I think that that is one key element of this. Like, you can't just promote team learning when something's happening or where something's gone wrong or where something's occurring in the group. It has to be every day. So as a leader, being aware of how you're showing up, how you're responding to people, removing things like but and however from your team conversations. When somebody shares an idea, well, we already tried that. well, but that didn't work last time. Those kinds of things. If you can be conscious and aware of those things that are occurring in the everyday conversation and start to root those out and shift to a more learning language, this leadership of the language of leadership is so important in the everyday. So I guess that's my point, is how important that is in the everyday conversation, so that when something does happen and it is critical, you're already there. You already have the ability to have that kind of conversation.
Nice.
So I just want to let you know, and everyone listening, that I did put the phrases in the chat. So feel free to copy those and paste them in another document so you can have them. It's oftentimes when on Zoom calls, a lot of the administrators that I work with, they'll take that page and they'll hang it on the wall so nobody sees it. But when they're in the Zoom call and the conversation's going, they just sort of like look over and they pick a phrase of which one it's, fits here. And then they come back and they say, I'm not so sure about that. Can you tell me, what are you thinking about that? Or you deserve a really good answer, and I'm not sure I have one. So this is what I'm thinking. So all those phrases are just another toolbox as an administrator or as a leader, that if you can just get started in your sentence, everything else comes naturally from there.
Nice, and excellent examples of using language that is inclusive, that makes people feel connected. So thank you so much for that. We've got our fourth one. And once again, Nicole, your story beautifully introduced that final and fourth kind of concept I'm going to lay on the table, which is growing social capital by developing authentic conversations. And so I'm going to maybe just add another story that happened recently with one of the clients that I'm executive coaching, who is a regional sales manager for a national organization. And his colleague holds the same position. Well, she has sent an email to the senior team that kind of rubbed this particular senior executive the wrong way. So he shared with me, okay, I want to wait, give her some space and time before I re-engage. In the meantime, he gets a call from the C-suite that says, oh my goodness, what's going on over there? We need you guys to work in a collaborative way. If your relationship isn't solid, that's going to impact our bottom line and our results, because you two are killing it in your numbers and in sales. And so the senior executive, right, regional sales manager goes, I'll handle this. I got it. In my conversation, as I was briefing him for this, he said this to me. He said, you know what? I have a quality relationship with my colleague. We have had candid conversations that are truly authentic for the last 2 years since I've been working with her. This little tiny thing that has taken us sideways, it's okay, because we have a quality conversation. So I'm going to bring this up to her tomorrow in a way so we can surface it and clear it. And I think that that's a great example of what Nicole talked about. It's when you're developing these quality conversations, when you're growing your social capital with your colleagues. It's not about, oh, I'm just going to be, really inclusive for Julie today because I'm in a good mood and I like what she's saying. We're doing these things consistently. So when things hit the fan, when I'm sideways because I got an email that I think Julie is swooping down on something on my client, or I think that she's wronged me in some way, I'm not going to avoid it. I'm going to say, wait a minute, I'm going to circle back and I'm going to have that difficult conversation, because I know I have a quality relationship with Julie, and our relationship has created the safe space and trust so we can have the conversation and move forward. So I laid another story out on the table, and what I want to do is invite Julie. What are your thoughts? Because Nicole had another great one about the relationships and how it impacts results. What's really surfacing and resonating for you?
I think the first time you have a disagreement with someone, even if you're really good friends, but as colleagues, you have a disagreement, it's awkward those first few times to actually pull out and say, hey, I got a sense that things aren't good. What are you thinking? It's awkward. And I want to validate everybody to say, it's going to be awkward. Like, this is not a conversation that is going to be fun. But the more you do it, and the sooner you do it in the event, the sooner you can clear it and everything can be fine. My husband will lose sleep for a week, and he'll think and he'll talk and he'll, maybe I should have this, that, and the other thing, and blah, 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 blah. And then after a week or two, he finally gets enough courage to go and say, hey, I know that last meeting 2 weeks ago didn't go as well. And the person's like, yeah, I know. And I agree 100%. And this is what I would have done. Here he was stressing for 2 weeks, when if he would have done it the next day, it would have been fine. So that would be the thing that I want you, not only number one, realize it's going to be awkward, and number two, do it as soon as you possibly can.
Yeah, beautifully stated. Or it festers, and it could be just be internally for him, but it also could have festered with that other individual, impacting their ability to communicate. Excellent. Nicole, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's such a great point by Julie. When we hold on to things in that way, it can create all kinds of other problems and undue stress for ourselves. So if we can handle it as soon as possible, I think that's key. But I think another element of this is really coming back to some of the other things we stated. As leaders, if we can operate from a place of care for those that we lead and curiosity to learn more and know who the people are that we're leading, I think that goes a really long way. And I think if we are able to create the opportunities for our teams to connect with each other, when you have that sense of camaraderie and the sense of, I know you, it's not just I'm working with you on a project, it's I know something about you and I genuinely care about you as a person. It makes those hard conversations much easier. I love the example that Brene Brown gives in some of her books, and she talks about a marble jar and how every interaction you have with someone, you're either putting marbles in the jar, that sense of trust, that sense of, good feelings you have about someone, you're constantly kind of putting marbles in the jar. And when something bad happens, you might spill some out, you might lose some of those marbles. But the point is you've built a relationship, you've had the kind of conversations and interactions where you've, developed that social capital with the people that you care about, the people that you work with, so that when something goes wrong, you mess up, they mess up, you're not dumping that jar out and starting from scratch, or you're not starting from ground zero. You have a foundation that you can build on to repair whatever occurred or handle whatever tough situation you might all be facing together.
Yeah, that's a great visual. I like that visual. Thank you so much. That's an excellent story. And I would like to just kind of wrap this up a little bit and then maybe model a quick checkout. I'm just encouraging all of you out there, as you've noticed, we've shared 4 kind of ideas and ways to reinvigorate and kind of get back, reestablish some of those relationships. So thank you, Nicole. So over communicate and facilitate a common understanding. Had some great examples of great ways to do that. Listen to understand, promote team learning, and develop authentic connections. And really that builds that social capital. So when somebody picks up that jar with marbles and throws it down the street and it explodes, right? You've got some social capital so you can rebuild that in a way because you've already made those connections. So I'm going to ask the participants to use the chat feature and just to maybe type in, what was your most significant learning for you in our conversation today and why? And I'm also going to ask my 2 colleagues just to do a quick checkout. What was the most significant thing for you and why?
I think the most significant thing for me from our conversation is everyone is in this boat. This is not just a new business that's growing or a business that's been around forever. Each and every one of us is having this transition to try and reconnect, and just don't be so hard on yourself and don't be so hard on those around you, and just take it easily and take it slow and build that social capital up again. And I'm out.
I think what's resonating for me is similar, Julie. It starts small. If there's one thing that resonated for you here today that you can take back and just open yourself up to creating those connections just a little bit deeper, just one little step deeper, one little inch deeper, you can continue to work on it. This is a continuous practice. It's not going to happen overnight, and it is going to, be awkward at times or feel vulnerable, which none of us prefer to feel. And so I think just know that, be prepared that it is going to feel that way and take that step anyway. It's what's resonating for me. And I'm out.
Awesome. Well, I think the one thing that always resonates with me is, people say, "Oh, how am I going to build trust? How am I going to do this?" And it's simple things that you can do in your everyday leadership conversations. And hopefully you've noticed we modeled beginning with a focusing statement. I close the loop with my colleagues. What are you hearing? What are you thinking? I continually close the loop, continually invited everyone into the conversation. It is these simple things, which is truly facilitating conversations versus presenting or just disseminating information. So my invitation to you is not only think about those 4 things, but also think about, how do I facilitate learning with my team? And I'm out. And one of the things, if you want to continue to learn more ways, please go to our website, www.gojlc.com, and you can learn more information about our executive coaching, our leadership development programs, our customized team development programs, and some of the organizational kind of cultural supports that we do that really enhances performance throughout your organization. And I'm going to hand it over to Nicole just to wrap it up in our final comments.
Yeah, I just wanted to share that if you go out to gojlc.com, you're also going to find a lot of really wonderful resources. You can find our podcast there, which is a lot of really great conversations, just like this one, where you can take away some leadership insights, tools, practices, and learn more about the work that we do. We also offer a free discovery conversation. So if anything that we shared today resonated for you, feel free to go to that contact page and fill out the little form, or there's a link right there where you can schedule a time to connect with one of us where we can have a conversation. We'll do some live in the moment coaching and address whatever situation that you're trying to handle that day, or talk about an upcoming project and how you might approach it. So reach out, take advantage of that discovery conversation. I think you'll really benefit from just having a partner, a thought partner to talk about that with, and learn more about what it is that we can help you with in the long term. So thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate your time, your wonderful comments, everything that you shared with us. We just an honor, as I mentioned in the beginning, to be here with you today. We hope you'll join us for the next one. Go to the website. You can also find a link to register for our upcoming webinars and events. So thank you and goodbye.